Oh, here we go. This is the Kung Fu Life Podcast, episode 34, and I'm your host, Leo. So, this podcast is going to be about the. Oh, you know what? Shit. I'm supposed to do the pop filter. Forgot to put this on. Okay, so this is a little bit better, I think. Let me try this. Is this better? Do I need to have my mouth on the screen? I don't know. I wish this microphone could like tilt like that, you know? Is this better? Is this better? Hello? Is this better? Is this better? Sorry guys, I know this YouTube video is gonna be showing all the setup, but oh well. Maybe somebody will find it interesting. Let me pull this out a little bit more. Okay. I think we are there. Oh, come on. All right. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Is this good enough? Is this good enough? Is this good enough? Okay. I don't know what you call them, the sound wavelengths look decent. So let's continue. So like I was saying, this one is going to be about the story, a Bible story, the prodigal son story. And the reason why I'm doing this is because because for one, this story has relevance to me personally, and I think it teaches some valuable lessons. And by the way, there there's a man named Dr. Jordan B. Peterson who has done a phenomenal job with some biblical lectures that he worked on several, I think this was several years ago, maybe 2016, 2017, but he had been, and he recorded them and put them online. And so on his, you can find them on his podcast, Jordan B. Peterson podcast. And if you listen, if you're at all interested in it, listen to it and check it out, because there's some of the most amazing lectures I've ever heard. And I wish that I had received some lectures like that while I was in college, because he recorded them actually as he was giving them to a an audience of mainly of his students, and then I think some of it spilled over into his. He actually did a formal lecture series and invited anyone who wanted to come, and thousands of people came to listen to him talk about Bible stories. So it's really interesting. It's really good. I think he's got a really excellent viewpoint on that. And one of the things I wanted to talk about in the lessons learned section is actually Jordan Peterson, because a lot of people will get depending on your political leaning, a lot of people will get a certain point of view about Jordan Peterson that isn't necessarily true. So I've noticed that people who lean towards the left, if they Google Jordan Peterson, they will come up with a bunch of articles and news stories about Jordan Peterson and how he's some crazy fascist alt right wing conservative, and that's just not the case. If you really listen to his lectures, you would have a completely different viewpoint. Same thing if you're a right-leaning person and you Google Jordan B. Peterson, then a lot of what you'll come up with is just normal stuff, like stuff about his website and that sort of thing. So my point is that I've recommended Jordan Peterson to some people, and they've gotten a negative point of view about it, thinking that I'm trying to force something on them, or that I'm coming from a bad point of view or whatever. But the point is that you can't judge a book by its cover. We know that. And you really have to listen to someone before you can actually judge them or even pass judgments on them. Like, I've known people who have shared news clips or news articles of Jordan Peterson that were completely way off base. I mean, I actually read the article, and it was clear to me that the person writing the article had never listened to a single Jordan Peterson lecture, at least not all the way through. Probably listened to little bits and sound bites from other people with his point of view. And that's just a terrible thing to do. I mean, why would you even share something like that when you don't even know the person? You haven't looked into anything about them. You have no clue who they are. But just from this random article that you found, and probably found that article because of your political leanings and how you type things into Google and what you click on, that's the opinion that you're going to have. So you're letting someone else dictate your opinion by doing those things. And that is completely wrong and not anything anyone wants to actually do. So don't do that. Listen to his stories. His biblical lectures are unbelievably good. I mean, unbelievably good. I don't care where you at, or I don't care if you're not even Christian. If you've had any, uh, if you've had any, if you even know the stories. I mean, everybody knows the story of Noah and the ark. Of I can't remember all the stories that he's done, but everybody knows the story, the basic story, the stories of the Bible. And so he goes through those very thoroughly and intelligently. And so I highly recommend those lectures to anybody because they have so many different lessons in them. And he talks about different religions as well, but he bases the lectures on the different stories and kind of breaks them out from a psychological point of view, because he's a psychological professor, and he's got his doctorate in psychology and in clinical psychology, and so he's got a lot of experience with this stuff, and he's been a clinical psychologist for over for like 20 or 30 years or 40 years, however long, and also a professor as well. So he's worth giving it a listen to. His voice might throw you off in the beginning because he's got a little bit of an odd voice, but just listen to him. I mean, it will open your mind up. So that being said, that's what kind of got me into wanting to do this. Not that I can hold a candle to any of his lectures at all, but this story is like I said earlier, relevant to me, and I want to cover it and kind of figure out what it really means to me and what I really think about it. So here we go, the prodigal son. Also, there's a Kung Fu movie called The Prodigal Son, which is an excellent Kung Fu movie, so check that one out as well, but it doesn't really have anything to do with this story. Alright, so here's the story. And I should mention that the version I'm reading is a version that has translated the original words into a more modern tone, but I've actually I reread the story. I read this version of the story, and then I reread the version of the story in the original Bible language. And from what I understand, of course, of that old school kind of way of talking, this covers it completely. So there you go. All right, let me adjust this here, see if this helps me to be able to see. Okay, so the prodigal son. The first part is the parable of the lost sheep. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. parable of the lost coin. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. The parable of the lost son. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country. After he spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied. 'Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found.'" So that's the story. Now let me go through it one more time with some commentary. So the first part of this, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. This is a bold request. Not even a request, it's a demand. First off, at that time, typically the eldest son received everything, or at least the lion's share. But in this case, he says that he divided his property between him, meaning he gave half basically to the younger son. And from the request alone, you get a feel for this younger son's character. He was a bit insolent and audacious for sure, presumptuous to say the least. So you kind of get an idea into the disposition of the younger son. Particularly since this is something that usually happens after the parents pass away. So in that way, it is almost like the younger son is saying that he has no more use for his father. Clearly, this is not the ideal son. And very strange that the father granted this request of his, or this demand of his. It is telling as well that the older son did not ask for the same treatment or argue against it. This is also a lesson in that if you do not ask for it, then you won't get it. In fact, you would be surprised what you can get when you simply ask for it, even if you don't deserve it. But be careful what you ask for, because as I heard from a Sihing of mine about something that Moyat used to, a trait of Moyat's, I should say, with his students anyway, is that he would always give them enough rope to hang themselves with. So it could be that the father was actually doing this very thing, giving his son enough rope to hang himself with, so that he could learn a lesson. The next part. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach. He was essentially starving. So now, knowing his personality, knowing his personality, you're not surprised that he squandered all his wealth. But why did he do it in a far-off country? Why not just stay at home and squander it there? Well, probably because he knew he was going to squander it, and he didn't want anyone he knew previously to be around him, as in family members or friends or whoever, or friends of the family. He didn't want any of them to be around to stop him or remind him of his responsibilities. And that probably has a lot to do with it as well. Just being in that at home would remind him of the responsibilities that he's shirking. So he ran away. He ran away to do things that he should not do. And he ran away to not be reprimanded for it. And of course there was a famine afterwards. Like from the story of Noah and the ark. The lesson from the story of Noah and the ark. If you do not prepare and live your life properly, then you will be crushed by a sea of consequences. However, if you live your life right and prepare properly, then you will survive the flood and have dominion over all living things. And then you will also be around to repopulate the world and conceivably have dominion overall people as well. Then he comes to his senses and he says, you know, I've sinned. I will tell my father I've sinned against heaven and against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And so hire me like you would a servant. And he had there's a reasonable shot of success here. This is actually his best opportunity to succeed. I mean, remember, he is starving. He is about to die. So who's going to give him a break? His family. And he understands that they're probably not going to accept him completely, so he decides to go to his family and ask to be hired as a servant. Now let's be clear about one thing. There is no mistaking that it takes a young man years to come to his senses, especially a young man like the one in this story, as we've discussed about his character. He would not have thought to come back immediately because he is rightfully ashamed of what he has done. His pride would not let him come back for a long time. And he rightfully assumes that his father will not accept him back as his son, but would probably at least hire him out as a servant. And let me be honest with you. How do I know that it takes a young man years to come to his senses? Because I was once a young man, and it took me years to come to my senses. And I believe that is a common trait with most young men. But if you can avoid that, then definitely do it. Come to your senses as early as you can in life. Your life will be much, much better. But being a young man, you're going to make mistakes. And this young man made a huge mistake. And he is now very, very regretful of it. But you got to think about this. So this was years in the making. So he was probably destitute for, let's say it's at least a year. That's a reasonable assumption. I think it would actually be longer than that from my experience personally. Probably would be more like, could be 10 years, could be 5 years, whatever. It was a long time. And that's important because that means that his decision was not a flippant decision, and I don't believe that this was that he was being underhanded and trying to, and thinking to himself, I'll just say this to my father, but actually really expect him to accept me back full-heartedly. That does not strike me as being the case. Plus, what would be the point of the story if that was the case? The story would take on a totally different meaning. But, so not only that, but in addition, he doesn't even know if his father is alive. I mean, he's assuming that he is alive, but he doesn't know for sure. He may have to come back begging to his brother for forgiveness. So, in my opinion, he goes back with the right mentality, which is to accept blame and responsibility for his sins and be willing to spend the rest of his life making up for his transgressions. It's like, that's what you do when you apologize, right? A true apology is acknowledging the effect that your mistake has had on whoever you're talking to, and accepting full responsibility for it, and then doing whatever you can to make up for it. Moving on. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion, ran to him, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. So this brings up the question, why would his father still have compassion for him? For one, because he was happy to see him alive. He had no idea if he was alive or not either. And no matter what, as a good parent, you will always be happy to see your child return, especially if you have not seen them in years, or even knew if they were alive or not. Not to mention, he had been living like a pauper, feeding pigs and not even getting as good of food as the pigs ate. So he was most certainly malnourished, clothes were ragged, surely, and dirty as well. So you can imagine him coming up to his father seeing him in this condition, and obviously he's going to have some compassion for him. What father would not have that compassion? The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." And rightly so. He learned his lesson the hard way, which is unfortunately the way some of us have to learn it, me included. Hopefully I'm done with most of those hard lessons. But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring me the best robe and put it on him. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." What a great father. He knew that his younger son's confidence was destroyed, that his pride was gone, that he was beyond humbled. He knew that for all intents and purposes, his son was a slave and had no ego left. He knew that the best thing for his son was to welcome him and quickly get him into a different state of mind by changing his physical appearance. And this is a good lesson too, because any man who has ever put on a suit knows this. When you put on a suit and tie and look sharp, your whole demeanor and personality changes instantly. You hold your head up higher, your shoulders of their own accord seemingly pull back more. Your spine stiffens, and while your stride lengthens and becomes more of a swagger. And people treat you differently. His father knew this. And he sacrifices the best piece of meat possible and gives it to everyone to eat. Why? Because he is acknowledging the death of his son from before he left, the death of that insolent, audacious, terrible son who, for all intents and purposes, died. And the rebirth of the son that deserves to be at the table, who is currently in front of him. And then the older son gets mad, hears about it, gets mad, and says, talks to his father, says, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." So many might say that you see the older brother's point of view. And although he jumps to conclusions about the prostitutes, he's probably not wrong about that. But still, there's no need to jump to conclusions. But he is also reacting out of anger before even hearing the real story. This is normal, but not right. I think you can also see this echoed in any older sibling whose pride has been hurt by the attention received from a younger sibling. I've seen that with my cousins. Not my cousins, my nieces and nephews. Moving on. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again, was lost and is found. So this story has some truly relevant correlations to my life. I was the prodigal son, or I guess am. And my parents thought that this story, we had, I went to church as a kid, and we had talked about this a little bit with my parents about this story, because my parents always thought that the story was wrong in the message that it portrayed. They agreed with the older brother and believed that he should be given everything and the younger brother should be shunned, or at the very least not celebrated. But I think they missed the point. For one, the older brother has received all the benefits of being under his father's protection his whole life. He has never starved. Yes, he has worked, but always had a warm bed to come home to. And when he needed anything, he got it. He never had to deal with the issues of being alone and having nothing. He was always the boss's son, so he got preferential treatment everywhere. He never wanted for anything. Yes, he has been disciplined, which is great, and he will reap all the rewards of that discipline, including his inheritance, which is still intact. But there is still something else here. The younger brother needed the attention. The older brother did not. The older brother was good to go. His life was straight. There was nothing for him to worry about. The younger son got some extra attention. Why? Because he needed it for his development. The older brother didn't need it. He was developed. I think there is another thing here as well. I think part of why the father so readily accepted his son back is because, like any good father would, after his son left, he probably thought about it deeply. I know I would. He most assuredly thought of all the mistakes that he made raising him. And he thought of all the ways that his actions as a father could have led his son to developing the way he did. I think about that constantly with my son. What am I doing? How is what I'm doing going to affect him later in life? I think about that constantly. How is what I've done in the past, even though he's only 3 years old, how I acted when he was 2 years old affecting him now? And you see that real time. So his father was definitely thinking of these things. And the younger son was a direct result of how he was raised. He did not develop that insolence spontaneously. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was learned. It developed as he developed as a human being. Somewhere along the line, he learned that that was the way to be. His leaving the house and asking for his inheritance prematurely was brought about because of the lack of parenting, in my opinion. I think his father realized this and also wanted to make amends for the mistakes that he made in the past. I think a lot of issues in the world are a direct result of bad parenting. Now nobody's going to be perfect. You can't expect that. And you can't blame, and once you get to a certain age, and I say that age is 23, you can't blame, at least as a man, 23, you cannot blame your parents for how you are. It is now, at that point, it is now your responsibility to fix any flaws that you have, to first realize any flaws that you have, and then fix them and make yourself into a better human being. However, the point that parenting is the root of most of societal's problems, I think is absolutely true. It's not it's not an easy fix, clearly, because these things are ingrained in you and you don't really realize it, what you're teaching your kids, unless you really, really think about it. And even then, you're going to miss something. Something is not going to occur to you because you're not perfect and you don't have a perfect memory and and life is too complex to remember everything and understand, or even if you do remember it, understand all the implications of your actions. But what you have to do is try to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And that's one of the main reasons I started training Kung Fu, because I felt like martial arts was what could get me to that point. And one of the mistakes my parents made was not letting me train martial arts when I wanted to. When I was, how old was I? When I had to be 6th grade, 5th or 6th grade. I came to my parents and I asked them if I could train martial arts. And they said no. And the reason they gave was that they thought they didn't want me to become a bully. And first off, most people who train martial arts, who really train martial arts, are not going to become bullies. That's actually the opposite goal of martial arts. That being said, there are still some martial artists who do become bullies. But that's because of either they have a bad teacher, like you see in the Karate Kid. By the way, the Karate Kid, the Cobra Kai, the new one, I just started watching that recently. And man, that is a good show. That's actually a really good show. My favorite part uh, is when the guy, I forget the name, the blonde guy, the bully from the past, from the Karate Kid, when he's teaching the students come in, and he's teaching one of the students comes in with a cleft palate, and he just he just leans into him, but the lesson he teaches him in that moment is like is to is to make his appearance not about that cleft palate. And it's funny, as soon as the guy ends up doing a mohawk and coming back into class, and he has a mohawk, and like a blue mohawk or whatever, and looking all punkish, and it it totally makes him look like a badass. Like, it really does. He automatically looks, his badassery level gets kicked up with several notches from doing that. But anyways, a little sidetrack. But the point is that if your kid comes to you and wants to learn martial arts, or even if they don't, I think you should encourage them to learn martial arts. I actually think that martial arts should be part of the school system, of the curriculum that you learn, and starting in, you know, in kindergarten, actually. I really believe that that should be the case. Now, how would you implement that? I don't know. That'd be pretty difficult. But I think that that would be. I think that that would be vastly beneficial to our country. That's what I think. Anyway, so that's one of the mistakes that my parents made. Plenty more, but there's no sense in dwelling on the fact that they made these mistakes. And in fact, that led me to sneaking out when I was 16 and had a car, sneaking out and going to some different classes. Of course, I didn't really have any money. I had a little bit of money, but you know, because I was still working. I was working in the summertime and doing that sort of thing, but not really enough money to maintain a tuition at a school. So I snuck out, did some excuse me, some free lessons. Um, but I couldn't find any martial arts school that I really liked anyway. I wasn't really impressed with any of the ones I went to. But I started training basically as soon as I got to college. So I was able to find a place. So that's my story. Anyways, there's a lot to these biblical stories, and like I said, look into them, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned from them, and the way Jordan Peterson lectures on them, it's just an excellent point of view. So I highly encourage everyone to go check his lectures out if you haven't already. In fact, the lectures are actually, I have the Jordan Peterson 12 Rules to Live By book on the website as recommended reading on the Kung Fu Louisville website. However, those biblical lectures, I think, are actually way better than the book. I mean, he kind of touches on those biblical lectures a little bit in the book, but if you really get into those lectures, I think that they're much more powerful than the book, actually. So check them out. And and just so you guys know, I'm not some staunch or ultra conservative Christian person. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic, and I consider myself a Christian. But in a way, I also consider myself a Taoist. And I think that comes a lot from the martial arts training. I think martial arts training kind of leads you. I mean, Taoism to me, isn't really a religion, it's a philosophy. And so I don't think that, I think that you can be a Taoist as well as a Christian or Muslim or Hindu. Hindu? Is that what you say? Hindu person? I don't know. Or any other religion. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't know what I'm trying to say, actually. I guess I was just kind of rambling on. This is when it helps to have other people on the podcast to kind of not let you ramble on, I guess. Anyways, the Muay Thai anniversary seminar is happening May 7th to the 9th. It's the 35th anniversary of the Richmond Muay Thai Kung Fu School. So be there or attend via Zoom. I know some of my students are planning on doing that. I am also offering some Zoom classes with me. You can have basically a little, like a mini private lesson, you could say, with me if you're interested. Mainly doing that for the Louisville people, but if anyone else is interested in it, then let me know. I know the Detroit anniversary is coming up soon. I've got some students planning on going to that. The Austin one should also be coming up this summer at some point. I don't know how they are going to do it, but I'm assuming that everything should be pretty much opened up by that point. We might not even have to wear a mask. But yeah, so this should be a great year for workshops and seminars, especially towards the second half of the year. So take advantage of that where you can. And until next time, thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.